Hey everyone, this is Todd Latourie from Queensryche.
They expect like 1 million people.
There's so much music, like just the second half, it's just about twice as thick as the first half.
What an introduction.
Oh.
Yeah, it's nice to keep it fresh, otherwise it gets stale.
Very sad. Sad I can't have both.
That is a fabulous question.
When people see that, I hope they'll realize that. I still have degrees, I swear.
And you're watching Eclectic Arts Media.
I had no idea who they were, but this 4 minutes worth of music, I was like hooked.
The queens of rock and roll, Fanny.
Take care of yourself. This is your story.
Fanny is iconic, truly before their time. Men coveted rock and roll, that was theirs.
This is a girl with an instrument on. So, okay, this is a game changer.
Fanny was the first all-woman rock band that could really play and really get some credibility within the musician community.
So we broke through that barrier, and it wasn't through talking. We just fucking did it.
There was so much pressure all the time. I mean, you have to remember how young we were and how scared we were, really.
We're brown and nobody knows where the Philippines is. And many times when I felt worthless and challenged.
It was hard. Being gay was still a disease. You could not be a lesbian in Fanny.
They're like my sisters. I've known them since I was 16.
Ooh, baby, won't you give your love to me?
Being in a rock band gave us a place to belong. We were all different together.
You make me right.
They made 5 records. You know, the Go-Go's get a lot of attention for what we did, and we only made 3 records.
They didn't have that #1 hit in the platinum records that the other bands had, but those other bands wouldn't have had those platinum records if Fanny didn't open the door. It's always the ones that started that get fucked.
Let's go back to where it all began. 17, then we started a band.
If I had many lines in my face as Keith Richards, I don't know that we would have been offered a record deal.
On the road, girls on the go, doing what we knew was gonna save our souls.
Rocking is a metaphor. When you fail, you pick yourself back up again.
They were considered badass, and they still are.
My big joke with my friends now, maybe I'll be famous when I'm 80.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Mark Sugiyama from Eclectic Arts Media based here in Seattle, Washington, and thank you so much for joining me on this Tuesday, the 19th of September, 2023. And I'd like to thank David Howard Thornton for joining me this past Sunday. It was great getting a chance to talk to him about his characters, Art the Clown and the Mean One, and he's got all kinds of stories, so I really enjoyed talking with him. And if you'd like to know more of what I have coming up, which I do have some things in the works, please follow me as Eclectic Arts Media, one word, on Instagram. That's where I post everything first, and then some of that information migrates over to other social media platforms. If this is your first time joining me on my YouTube channel, if you could do me a huge favor and please hit the subscribe button as well as the notification bell. That helps me out. And if you're on the Twitch side of things, if you follow me over there, I will definitely follow you back. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to this particular interview has been pending for quite a while, and so I'm really stoked that my guest is here. So without further ado, let's get to my introduction. My guest today is a musician, songwriter, producer, educator, role model, advocate, and pioneer for women. Her band Fanny was the first all-female rock band to release an album on a major label. The band influenced generations of female artists, which is well documented in the film Fanny, The Right to Rock, which looks like this. This is my copy that I purchased, by the way. It is my great pleasure to welcome to the Eclectic Arts Media virtual studio, June Millington.
Hello.
Hi, June. How are you?
Good.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely, no problem.
Yeah, so we're definitely going to talk about the documentary and obviously Fanny and everything, but I want to jump right into what happened during the summer because I have a background in education myself. And so when I found out you were doing the IMA summer camps and your workshops and everything, I wanted to hear a lot more about this. So how did the workshops go this summer?
Well, the Rock and Roll Girls Camp sessions, and we had 4 of them, and we also had a recording camp. So it was busy. I mean, they went well. It's our first time since COVID, since the pandemic, when absolutely every single session was here, and the girls were present. So, it's exhausting work. You can't just lecture to teenage girls or preteen girls. That's not going to go over whatsoever. So, you got to really work hard at it.
Yeah, and that's why we had some dialogue setting this up, and I think I was looking at I gave some dates in July, and you said, "Oh, I could probably do that one date, Mark," and I'm like, you're in the thick of things, and I know how that was for myself having been like that. So I'm like, maybe we should wait till you're done with everything, and you can be a little bit more relaxed. And
that was a good idea. That was really good.
I'm so glad that it worked out.
Yeah.
And so, for people that aren't aware of IMA and the workshops that you do, how far back did they go? When did they start?
They started once we moved here to Massachusetts from California. So we were in Northern California in Bodega for about 10 years, from around 1990 to 2000, which is when the David Bowie comment about Fanny came out in Rolling Stone. So, and then we were able to move here and buy this property, and then everything changed because all of a sudden we controlled everything. We could control the parking, we could control who came in and out, and all of a sudden, the idea of doing a rock and roll girls camp just all of a sudden was just like there and possible. So, and it was welcomed very quickly. I learned several things early on, like I just said, you cannot just lecture to teenage girls. They really don't like that. They don't want to be in school. So you have to work on your seduction techniques. How you get them to play together, because it's a collaboration camp. A lot of girls haven't really liked each other, and after they left camp, they tell us, wow, all of a sudden I'm getting to know girls and I'm liking us, because they're competing for very limited resources, attention from boys or, you name it. So that was a very interesting hurdle to really recognize and cover. Plus, they're running away from their bodies in a way because they're coming into their bodies, and they realize instinctively there's a lot of stuff going on. I don't even know how to approach this. So, in particular, I take it upon myself to make that seduction of getting them to enjoy their bodies by being in music, music is everything. Music is life. So we're working with the perfect medium, and it's a healing tool. A lot of these girls come in, and I feel like as the years have, gone from 2001, which was our first camp, to now, 2023, a lot of the girls are really anxious. So, it's really good to get them into the music because it's confidence building, it's affirming. So I see this as, my life's work. Aside from I'm working on my second book, I'm turning my first book into an audiography, and I'm working on my second book. So I'm doing a lot. I mean, I'm 75. I can't believe I'm still alive.
Well, that's one, we're glad that you're alive.
Thank you. I'm glad we're talking.
Yeah. And it's interesting, all the things that you just said, because back in, I started teaching right out of college in 1993, and I was a special education teacher.
Okay.
So at the middle school level. So a lot of my students, unfortunately, they're not accepted by the mainstream students that are there.
Yes.
They deal with all kinds of bullying issues. There's going to be other types of issues. And I was viewed as like this, he's like the cool teacher, but we don't know what he does because they just knew I played guitar. And so I decided to talk to my principal. How about if I do like an after school club where I'm teaching guitar? And he was like, oh, that's really cool, Mark. Why don't you go ahead and do that? We'll find a little bit of money in the budget for you. And the students that first came to me were the students that were in my class. So I say 90% of them had IEPs and were special education students. And I still remember one particular young girl who came up to me, who was a 7th grader, saying, "Is it okay if I join?" I'm like, "Absolutely. I want you there. This is a safe space for everyone." And she was into all the grunge music at the time. So she wanted to learn Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and Nirvana. And I was like, "Yeah, bring it. This is what I want." I said, "If it's a style of music that maybe I'm not quite well versed in, that's okay, because then I'll become the teacher to try to figure this stuff out, and also the students." And so I love the fact that you've been doing these camps for so long, and specifically with girls, because there's still, yes, and you can speak to this, we've come, quite a ways, but there's a long way to go in terms of not looking at, like, for instance, I interview a lot of metal bands that have female singers, so they call them female-fronted bands. That's kind of like, isn't she the singer of the band?
Yeah.
That's what a lot of the ladies tell me. So the fact that you're empowering these young women is tremendous, and I really applaud you.
Well, you just pointed something out. When we're surprised that things are not as further ahead than we maybe hoped, or thought. I realized in doing these camps, every time a human being is born, it starts all over again. The whole thing starts all over again, so we can't, yes, a lot of stuff has changed. Let's face it, it's a lot better for me now than it was when I was born in 48 and was becoming a teenager in the 50s, right? I was a preteen. But so you gotta just work from kind of zero every single time, because they don't, just because they're born in 2000 whatever, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, doesn't mean that they have advanced. They're still going from point zero, and that was something that was hard for me to accept. However, and my partner, who actually runs IMA, she was so amazed when she saw what happened when the girls start bands. It's really incredible. It's algorithmic. They just expand, it's so quickly, and their confidence level rises. They have a pride in what they're doing. It's really incredible. And it's kind of hard for me in the beginning because I wanted to be one of the girls in the band. I didn't want to be the teacher. But I had to realize, well, that's kind of over with. You are the teacher, so get a grip.
That's amazing, and it's a really good point too about when you have young girls come together to work together as a band unit, and all those other things that kind of come from that aspect.
Yeah.
It's one thing if you're practicing guitar or bass or drums on your own in your house, but when you get among other musicians, the dynamic totally changes. And you're right.
And that's why it is collaborative, because to play with someone else on any level really changes everything.
It does, absolutely. My first bands were back in high school, and then as recently as in 2016, I was playing in a duo around town. So it's still like, as soon as I collaborate with this other human being, things change. And it's, I think, probably one thing too that's really interesting too, like you said, about it's like going back to starting over when someone's born, especially for a young female.
That's right.
That I had an interview with a tremendous singer, guitar songwriter from Switzerland, and she was telling me about the details of her guitar, the humbucker she has in there, and she's going through all the technical geek speak stuff. And I totally understood it, but then some of the comments that were coming in were talking about, how does she know this stuff? And it's kind of like, here we go again. Here's that whole mentality of like, why wouldn't she know this stuff?
I get a lot of questions. People write to me on Facebook or whatever, and I get a lot of questions about my sound, mostly from guys. But it's interesting because what they say, almost all of them, is that it's so refreshing to hear something as real as that. How did you, do that? But, I was in LA, and my best friends really were guys in other bands, especially the guitar players like Lowell George or Elliot Randall. Skunk Baxter was a really good friend of mine. And it was immersive, as our camps now are immersive. You just have to be so into it that you live, breathe, eat, and play all the time, and a lot of people don't seem to realize, hey, you got a guitar that has all these switches and all these settings. A lot of the girls who come in have never fooled around with their settings, and it's astounding to me. And then you have to learn the characteristics of your guitar with the amp you're playing. And that is so important. It's a marriage of possibilities, and it doesn't just happen. You got to spend hours fooling around, jamming with others if you can, experimenting, falling flat on your face and getting up again and just trying it again. It's a huge experiment every time. And when I pick up the guitar now, I don't even really think I'm that good. I never thought I was that good, but I'm a hard worker. I'm one of those ones who came up from behind, I was 100th or 1,000th in line because I practiced so much. All of a sudden, I was leading the pack, and that was hard work. And I have to say, a belief that I could do it because music brought me so much joy. So why couldn't I do it? There was nothing else that was giving me that. It's so simple.
That's you bring up some really good points, specifically about the marriage of your guitar, your amp, if you're using effects pedals, that whole line of that, you have to spend time with it, and let alone what's coming through these things.
Yeah, exactly.
Varies by
every single finger, every single type of vibrato. I experimented and I spent hours and hours on. That's why I got good tone. I mean, people say, where do you get that tone? I mean, I spent hours every single finger. Do you push up? Do you push down? How fast is your vibrato? What's the setting on your guitar? What's your amp? And I'm not even talking about pedals because I did for 20 years. I got into all the pedals, and then I got so tired of it. I felt like I was dancing while I was trying to play and sing. So I just gave that up, and I got guitars that I love, which are really good, and I've got a Fender amp that I love that gives me basically all that I need. So it really kind of just boils down to that. You got to work. You got to work. You got to pay attention. You got to be mindful. Every breath you take, that song, every breath you take has got to be dedicated to that pursuit. And I mean, I'm not even speaking like, at all facetiously. It is tough, hard slogging, but the results, are so fantastic.
So well said. I don't know how many times, again, with my students that I had, that I tell them, you're not going to learn guitar through osmosis. You need to practice.
No, really.
You need to.
I would pick solos that I would tear apart, like a phrase at a time. I'll give you an example. How long? How long is this again? The first two notes. How did he do that? How did he choose those notes? I think about how would I maybe have started. I wouldn't have done that. So I learned by learning others' perfection. I mean, I think that's a perfect solo, but there are a lot of them, a lot of great solos, and you can tear them apart. I mean, you don't need to be that guy or that woman, you just need to get that hint and get a little bit of the vernacular. It's a language, I mean, how do you expect to learn any language without getting into it, right?
That is very true.
I'm giving you the bad news, but the good news is when you practice and you get your results, you're flying, baby, right?
Absolutely. That's all those, thousands of hours that you spend with it. And I've had fortunately, I've had many musical guests come on, and we talk about the same thing. So hopefully the younger generation starts realizing don't be looking for the shortcut. Don't be looking for how do I get from here to here without doing the work. It's like, no, do the work, put in the work. It will pay off in the end. Let alone if you just say it for yourself, you start understanding all the nuances of your gear that you're playing with, like you just alluded to.
Exactly.
I had a couple students, I remember, again, this was a while ago, but they were asking me, but they wanted to buy my gear. They wanted to buy my amplifier from me so that they could sound like me. And I'm like,
that can't have been the only one in the world. So,
Yeah, I was like, okay, let's stop for a second. Let's kind of start talking about these things.
You know, even chaining amps. People don't even know about chaining amps, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can get two characteristics, and then you can have an ABC switch where you could just be using one, and then you kick the second one in, right? Or you have them both together, and then you kick the overdrive in, and one of them, you know, I mean, there are so many choices, but you got to fool around with them. That's one of my, I did that on the recent Fanny dates in May, where I would chain two amps together, you know, because they were available to me, so I did it, and it was really cool. But people didn't even know what I was doing. Honestly, they did not know what I was doing.
Oh, yeah. See, and I bet you there's some people that are watching this now or watching it down the road, like, what's she talking about?
What you talking about? I'm talking about you have your guitar plugged in one channel, then you go out of the second channel right by it, and you go into another amp. Automatically, you are chained. And now you can control the sound on both amps. Come on. It's so easy to chain two amps. And you know, I've had guys tell me, one guy, particularly Leo Damien, who's now married to Jean, he said he watched Eric Clapton chain about 25 amps together, get that huge wall of sound. And he carried those amps himself onto the stage for sound check. You know, you got to go through the steps. I mean, he knew what he wanted, and that's how he did it before he had roadies.
Holy moly.
Imagine chaining 25 amps, wall of sound.
Yeah. Well, there's a perfect example of someone spending the time to get the sound that they want. It's like, this is what it takes. This is what I'm going to do.
And the effort, my God. But once you got that stuff, I mean, it's incredible the way you can fly, you know, when you get the right sounds. But you got to work towards it. And even when you're there, you got to keep, you know, you got to keep it up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Are these some of the topics of many topics that come up during some of your camps then?
You know, I have to force them to pay attention to the, you know, the actual mechanics of getting sounds and playing. Because I think they just, first of all, they're not really used to working. This is the age of instant results, right?
Yep.
But nobody really tells them how you got to work so hard, and it kind of hurts. And the other thing is, speaking of hurts, I have stopped teaching beginning guitar unless I'm requested to teach guitar. Some of it is advanced, but very rarely, because they think they want to play guitar, and then they put their fingers on this, ow, right? Before the first callus. You know, no one's told them it actually hurts. So there's a lot of stuff to go through, you know. I mean, one can almost speak of it as a religious experience because, you know, the age of the hair shirts and all the stuff that people, you know, did to their bodies in order to suffer, like a lot of Catholics or whatever, the flogging, the blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's not as bad as that, thank goodness, but it is an effort. It is an effort.
Yes, it is. I had a really short period of time when I was traveling to teach guitar lessons to beginning students. And I don't know how many of them, they last maybe 3 lessons because of that same thing. I thought this was going to be easy. How do we get to the part where I can play a solo? How can we do these kind of things? And
you know, I just got tired of that. Honestly, it's not worth my time because I got other things I'd like to do. And I'm not going to spend it on someone who's not willing to take, you know, the long and winding road, shall we say, right? Mm-hmm. So I really, I'm not into it. I'm just not into it. I may start giving little, you know, like sort of like lessons or hints on YouTube or whatever, because I did it about 3 weeks ago for a song someone wanted to learn. So I just videoed it and people wrote it. And I'm like, God, why don't you do that more? Because people need to know. So I might do that. But sitting in front of someone going over and over the same stuff, I'm not into it. I'm just not into it. It's just way too boring. And I have sort of an OCD mind. So I'm going very fast. And for me to slow down for someone who's not really appreciating has become like a horror show for me internally. I just can't do it. Find your own willpower, for God's sake. You know, I'm not. It's in you.
See, that's probably you and me both. That's why I haven't taught lessons for years.
Oh, I get it. Yeah.
And I can even speak from this media side of things. When I get people that DM me about how did I develop my interview style, it's like I've been doing this since 2011. It's been years of me trying to be really honest with myself. Well, that sucked, and that didn't work, or this did work, or how did I approach this? And I'm constantly trying to get better. I'm never going to be satisfied with where I'm at. I want to keep improving. And like you just said, there's a generational thing of like, I want to skip all that. I just want to get to being the star that has 100,000 followers and all these other kinds of things.
Well, nothing comes easy. Let's face it. Living is not easy. So I'm a Buddhist, and I've been practicing since the 70s. And my first real transmission came from the Dalai Lama in 1981. He did the Kala Chakra in Madison, Wisconsin. And I really got the hit. And then I started finding amazing teachers post that. But, you start in Buddhism, you start from the basis of suffering. And that was what I didn't know before, that I was suffering, but I couldn't accept it. So once you accept that you are going to suffer, once you accept you got to work hard, you're going to suffer, you got to work hard, and then you can fly. Wow. It's so worth it. It really is.
It is. No, I absolutely agree. You will reap those rewards if you put in that effort and don't look for a shortcut.
And there's something I have said to my students, which is don't practice your mistakes. So something that my dad gave me a tip. I was having a math problem in high school. I was having trouble with it. I was doing my homework at the dinner table. After dinner. And I asked my dad to help me because he was a math whiz. And he said, okay, break it down to manageable proportions. So if I'm having a problem with a particular phrase, right, I'm not just going to keep playing that same phrase. I'm going to stop, especially if I'm recording. I'm going to stop and I'm going to break down what is the problem there. Is it my fingering? Do I need to change my fingering so I can move more easily? Do I just need to practice that one little phrase over and over so I can make the change, etc.? But, don't practice your mistakes. You can break it down and find out where the problem is and just go for it. So, I really think that's important. I've said that to a lot of girls, and it really is helpful.
That's a really good point. And you would know this too, as being a teacher, that boy, you really start understanding what you do, because you're trying to teach this to other students. You're like, man, I didn't realize, because they'll ask you questions about, why does your finger do this? I'm like, oh, I have to, why does it do that? And maybe I have a bad habit, and I don't want to.
Well, the other thing I do is I do it without fingers, and that is slide guitar. So that really demands a lot of attention to detail. I've started to get back into it, and I realized, you know what? I'm actually really good at slide. I worked really hard at it. It's easy for me to pick back up again, and it's a real joy, So the reason why I haven't played slide guitar so much, Gene has been telling me for like 20 years, you should play slide guitar more. But the problem is with slide guitar, you gotta have the trust in your band where you don't really need to play rhythm guitar. And a lot of times I was playing, like when you watch Bonnie, she's got a band that's got a guitarist. So he's playing the rhythm parts and she can just play her slide and shine. It's fantastic. She has it set up so she can do that, And I haven't gotten to the place where I can, afford that luxury. So I just kind of stopped. But I'm picking it back up, and it's really fun. And I remember all the times hours I spent with Lowell, for example, when he showed me how to dampen other strings other than the one that you're playing. That's why slide is so hard.
See,
that's a little hint.
There we go.
FYI.
Well, kind of shifting gears, for folks out there, there's some people that they've known about Fanny since your early days back in the 60s, 70s. And then you have people like me that start understanding who you were because of the documentary film that came out. Yeah. And I had a chance to interview Bobby back in May about the film and everything. But I definitely want to hear from you of what was that like for that process of basically having your life filmed to put this documentary together.
It was different from what I thought. I mean, she was here at the beginning of the recording of Fanny walked the earth. I think they were here for like 5 days. But post that, we weren't really let that much into the process other than doing our own interviews. So I didn't really know how it was going to turn out. There was a lot of attention from her and the people who were backing the film wanting to know more about why Brie was kicked out. And I found that like a little bit annoying because it was like, that's not the story of Fanny. You know what I'm saying? That's a personal story, right? So I didn't expect that. There was a lot of stuff that I did not expect, and I felt like we would, in my imagination and the way she first explained it when we first started to talk a couple of years before she even got into it, I thought we would be more involved, but we couldn't be. That's just how it is. So it was good. I mean, I got to say what was really in my heart and my true reality. Like, when I said, we didn't fucking talk about it, we just fucking did it. That is the truth. I didn't ask for anybody's permission because we were already in a band, and the truth of the matter is when we started our own band in high school, we entered into a little orb, and all I have to do to remember stuff is look into that orb and remember. Quite frankly, that's really how it is now. If I put on music, if I look up, on the net, the top 100 hits of 1961, then I can pick out songs I like. I'll press play, and all additional memories will come up. That's the function of music. We should all be making a playlist for when we're getting close to death and we can't really move that much anymore, because music really lights you up. That's just a little aside. But so it wasn't what I thought it was going to be, but it paid dividends. It's a story of Fanny, and it's well told, and people love it. So, I mean, for me, I would like to have a documentary done where my experiences in rock and women's music, and then starting IMA, are actually the whole story is told, and that has yet to be told. A lot of people in rock don't know about women's music. The feminist women music people don't know about Fanny, etc. And a lot of them don't even know about IMA. So I have to get used to being to that frustration always dogging me. Like, how do you not know, right? I've worked so hard. I mean, IMA has been a labor of love for me since like 86, So IMA is even less known than Fanny.
Well, and see, you bring up a really good point that for me, after I watched the documentary, it was like, so I had questions about other things because I knew you'd been involved with so many other things, but they weren't there. So I'm like, well, is that, part 2 that they do down the road? And you just spoke to that so beautifully about there's some really, really important things you've been doing that aren't anywhere really in that film. So
it's about human growth, really. And so that's why I needed to leave Fanny. I knew I had to learn how to be an authentic human being. Those are the perfect words, an authentic human being. Those are not my words. I picked it up. But it's so important because once you start digging underneath and finding out what's actually going on, it's really incredible. And you get so freed up. So now that I'm 75 and I left Fanny in 73, right? I had to basically just stay still for 6 months. Songs in the Key of Life had come out. So I spent like 6 months walking by the waves on Long Island, summer, home, and winter, and listening to Songs in the Key of Life for about 6 months. And then I started going to New York to jam, and I relied on my boyfriends, Elliot Randall, the guys in Sha Na Na, especially the drummer, whom, we did a lot of gigs with Sha Na Na. So these guys led me into jams, and then I started to meet women, so I would go to their jams, like in Brooklyn or wherever. I was, in the winter, I was freezing. I didn't even have a coat. I didn't know how to take care of myself, right? Because in Fanny, I kind of grew up in a band and grew up in Fanny, and then I realized, I wasn't growing as fast as I needed to. So I left, but I didn't know how to take care of myself, really. So that was life-threatening, actually. And there I am walking with my Les Paul in New York with no coat, the $5 in my pocket. I still had to take the subway to wherever. And could I get a hot cup of coffee? So I felt that was life-threatening. And I had to say to myself, June, you cannot do this again. You got to plan things a little bit better. But it was a learning experience.
It sure sounds like it. That's so interesting. I didn't even think about the fact that because you'd grown up through Fanny and the things that you experienced through that being a person, you missed out on things that the average person just takes for granted.
Yeah, the last year or two, I couldn't even carry my own guitar. They didn't want me seen carrying my guitar. I was so freaked out by that. Why can't I carry my guitar? Because it doesn't look good. We want you to be stars. Okay, so I mean, I let that happen, but it didn't really help me grow as a person. And the warfare inside Fanny, especially between me and Nikki, I felt was holding me back. And I knew I was, sinking into like a type of depression and a kind of despair that I was never going to somehow get out of this emotional place that I was in. And so I just had, and that was hard. That was really hard. It was hard on me and Jean in particular, because we started to play together ukuleles in the Philippines, but it just simply had to happen. And then it worked out, in the long run.
Wow, again, for people that who aren't familiar with Fanny and things of that nature, there's so many things that you guys did, and you just kind of touched on some of it in terms of not only being women in a rock band back then in the 60s, but also we have LGBTQ plus in the band.
Yeah.
We have biracial, bicultural in the band.
Yeah.
We have, just like you just talked about, we don't want you carrying your guitar because that doesn't look right. We don't want that getting out to people. There's a lot of this more like keep it under the carpet kind of stuff going on back then, and what's kind of turned around in the last maybe 10 years of like, no, put it all out there so you see everything. There's no smoke and mirrors, even though there's still some.
It changed really quickly because I got asked in 1976 was a pivotal year for me, and 75 is when I pick up with my narratives post the first book. The first book essentially ends in 75 when I leave Fanny. And 76, Jean was sitting with me in my home in Woodstock, and literally it was a huge snowstorm, and we're just chatting, and she had just told me that, what I call Fanny Point One had finally broken up. I mean, when I say finally, it had really, she said, we're not getting back together again. It is done, right? And then the phone rings like 6 minutes later, and it's Hollywood, literally management calling to say, hey, you have a hit. So get back here. We can make some money. That was Butterboy. Okay. And so she went back to LA, and about a week and a half later, she called me and said, would you do me a favor? Would you do this last tour with me? Because I just need that thing, that sound to back it up. So I went to LA, and it just so happened that Chris Williamson at the same time was starting to record her first album, and she was a fan of Fanny's, of mine and Fanny's. In fact, we were doing a gig in New York at Max's Kansas City, and I didn't know this, but she saw us get out of our car or cab or limo or whatever, and she walked in behind us and pretended to be part of the band, which is, that's pretty slick. So she understood who I was, and asked me to play on her first album, which was a massive hit. It's still selling, Changer and the Change. So that year was pivotal for me because I ended up playing the last Fanny tour with Jean, and then I played Chris on her album. That was 75 and 76. I was going on the road with Chris and being introduced to this massive movement that was so rock and roll. I couldn't believe it. That's what I'm talking about in this new book. The first 10 chapters I devoted basically to that, what a paradigm shift that was. And I'm lucky because even though it was tough, I was in the first part of Women in Rock, and I definitely was part of the beginning of women's music, and when Fanny was asked if we were feminists, but we just, we don't really know what a feminist is or was. We really didn't, but we think we are because we're doing what we want. That's as far as we got with it. But when I started to play with Chris, that's why I feel like this is such an important part of my story, is that's when it all blew apart. We were on the road in 76, and that was when so much was going on. So it really is a big part of my growth, and everything accelerated for me. And that's really, in my world, that's really important.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm curious as you're talking about that you've been writing these chapters for the second book. Do you foresee in your head that it's going to go from 76 to a certain year and stop so that you can do part 3, or is it kind
I'm
of?
just gonna do as long as I can stand it. Right now, I'm just entering 1981. Now, in 1980, I was producing Holly Near, who a lot of people know. I was producing her album Fire in the Rain, and I had met John Lennon because Gene's husband, Earl Slick, was playing on his album. I had gone to New York to hear Holly do a gig at the Bottom Line, and there's a phone call. And June Millington, there's a phone. I'm like, what? Who knows I'm here? Well, it was Slick, and he was with John and Yoko and the whole band. They were Mr. Chow's, and he said, hey, can you come down to Mr. Chow's because John wants to meet you? I said, yeah, I can do that. So, I finally met the last Beatle I had yet to meet, and I hung out with him at the sessions, So, and he was shot while we were mixing Fire in the Rain. So that was a big year for me. And I remember the songs that I wrote, and they're in the book, what the lyrics are, that were reflecting sort of my molting and entering a new stage of, let's say, knowing, which was largely intuitive, but was happening nonetheless. So it's a big deal for me. And 1980 was a big year for me. So I'm just entering 81 and I'm like 23 chapters along, right? So I'm going to do as much as I can before I die. And, maybe I'll do part 3. I don't know. I don't even know how far I am into book 2 because I'm just writing, right? And I haven't even started IMA yet. That was in 86 and I'm only in, 81.
Okay. So
But, I feel an obligation to really explain what was going on. I can't just say, and then we went to the studio and recorded and then blah, blah. No, I mean, it really needs to be a lot more in depth because I'm the only one who can tell the story. And like I said, I'm really the only woman who was at the beginning of Women in Rock and beginning of women's music. So I have a really visceral, and I have a type of memory that remembers stuff that I feel like is important to pass on,
Yeah, I mean, as I sit here listening to you, and I'm sure other people out there watching this right now are like, we're hearing history. We're hearing you lived it. It's not like something from a book. You were there in these places.
Right. That's right. Yeah, and I feel an obligation to really tell the truth as I experienced it, not as I necessarily saw it. Yes, I saw it, but I was experiencing it. It was going in my DNA, right? So it's really important.
Absolutely. I think about some times when I've been so fortunate to be as a photographer at a concert, and I remember the first time I got to shoot Smokey Robinson, and he came, just having him come out from stage right, and there I am, and he's standing maybe 2 feet from me, and I'm just kind of like all these things of like listening to his music when my parents would play it in the house when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Just seeing all the stuff that he's done, the thousands of songs he's written, and there he is standing in front of me singing. A ton of hit after hit after hit, and I'm taking his picture. And it was kind of like, this is the real deal. This is the person who lived this stuff. So when he was talking between songs, I was intently listening to it because it's not someone else's viewpoint. It's not a documentary filmmaker's viewpoint or some news person's viewpoint. It's his viewpoint, and he was there. So I love this. I'm so thankful that you're taking time to talk with me today. So someone like myself and other people out there can really start to absorb these things that either we don't know about or that we definitely want to hear more about because, again, you were there, you lived it.
Yeah, well, get my book. You can only get it at IMA, so go to ima.org to merchandise. And also put out an album last year that Slick played on that his son, Lee, who I'm really close with, my nephew, also played on and engineered. And it's a great album, honestly. I love that album so much. And there were 3 songs that were written the insurrection week. I knew my head was going to explode, and it did. And I wrote 3 songs that week. So there's a lot of stuff on it that I'm inordinately proud of.
Okay.
So you can get it at ima.org. Just go to ima.org, go to merchandise, and you'll see the book and you'll see the album, which is called Snapshots.
Awesome. There you go. See, this is a savvy veteran, folks.
I snuck it in, right?
No, you absolutely should. I'll make sure that the links are in the description as well, so
Thank
people
you.
can just go right to it. Because I think right now I have the Fanny official site there. I don't think I have the IMA one there, which I forgot to do.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. And there's also Jean's fundraising site, GoFundMe.com/Jean-Millington-Go. June Millington Go. So that's also important to me, and of course to her as well. You know, she had her stroke, and it's tough. You saw the video. So she's working hard every day, and I have to mention that it is not easy. It is not easy.
Absolutely. I'll make sure that link's in there as well. And yeah, for somebody who's been around some folks, I was just watching something where they're talking about that the older you get, the more goodbyes you say. And I'm like, wow, it was an athlete. He was a former football player, and he was talking about seeing his coaches that he loved and looked up to no longer being around, and some of his former players, same type of thing. And one of the coaches had 2 strokes, and so he'd go as often as he could. He'd take time out of his schedule, what he was doing, to go fly to New York and be with him, and seeing that work that he was putting in every day just to get back to some level of normalcy. Was like, he said, I've never worked that hard in my entire professional career as an athlete.
Yeah.
Watching him do what he has to do just so that he can start to maybe walk again, maybe he can talk again.
Right.
So,
and you know, there's no one who plays bass like Jean. So I mean, I am really invested to her possibly getting back to playing again. But you know, the feeling of playing with Jean, which I enjoyed for so many years, is actually incomparable, because she really is one of the best bass players in the world. And if you listen to Fanny, you can hear it. You know, just the intros are really incredible. Like there's a song that Nikki wrote called "Save Me." Was it "Save Me"? I think so. Anyway, the intro is just like phenomenal, and it reminds me so much of the music that we were hearing as we were starting the band and starting to do gigs. Is a lot of amazing music that was coming out of San Francisco. Of course, we were in Sacramento, just far enough to not get killed by all the drugs, you know. And I mean that sincerely. We were inoculated basically. So when we got to LA, we were not so into that. We were much more into music. But you know, the stuff that we learned just listening to bands who were in the Bay Area we were really lucky, because the competition was all the time, and it was really good. I mean, we saw the first version of Buffalo Springfield when I was in my first year of college at UC Davis, and we saw the Grateful Dead, you know, within 6 months of each other. And then I saw Jimi Hendrix at the Fillmore, you know. I mean, there was this little kid who was always standing in front of the lead guitar player, who was always jockeying for position. And then when I saw Santana's first album come out, I'm like, well, that was Santana. You know, you couldn't go on YouTube and see people play. You had to go to the gig, man. Yeah.
I love that. This is talking to people who, again, they don't understand. Well, I'll just watch it at home. I'll just go. That experience, that exchange of a stage, you know, humans on a stage to people in the audience and vice versa.
Yeah.
You can't replicate that through a television set or your phone or your tablet or whatever.
Exactly. You can get the facsimile. Send me your fax, man.
I started covering some the ballet and the opera and theater and musical theater. And so some of the photographers that knew me from like the rock and other types of music scene, they hadn't seen me in a while. So when I finally showed up again, they're like, Mark, where have you been? And I explained why I've been covering these other areas. And they're like, why? And I'm like, what I learned is that I love live events. I love something that took rehearsal. It took a team to put this together. And they're out there without a net, just like a band playing live. When the opera gets out there, if they hit a bum note, if they screw up their cue, they screwed it up. There's an audience watching this. And I love that aspect. And I think that's when they started to say, oh, okay, so you should come check something out at some point. Open your mind a little bit that we've got all this fantastic art in the city of Seattle, and you've basically ignored all of it. And so, but that just goes back to your point about get to the shows, folks, especially after COVID. Get to the shows, because we found out what happens. It can just disappear.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then you're stuck at home, watching stuff on YouTube and wherever else. Kind of ironic.
Interesting. When AIDS hit, a lot of the audience died. You know, and who pointed that out to me? I mean, even though I remember '79, I was playing a lot in the San Francisco area, and all of a sudden our gigs were disappearing, and that's because the audience was disappearing. I'm trying to think of Pretend It's a City. What's the name of that woman? Martin Scorsese is obsessed with her. Anyway, so she mentioned that. She said, the audience, you also rely on the audience to gauge yourself. And that's what makes you better, and that's quite true. It's the live shows are very important. I never don't get ready for a live show, even if it's just a solo gig. I do a lot of benefits for Gene. Even if it's a solo gig, I got to put my time in because I've written so many songs. And so I have 200 songs to choose from. What am I going to do? And then I got to practice them. I got to practice singing them and playing. And as I'm getting older, I'm starting to forget lyrics. I got to make sure I have the lyrics with, etc. I have to remember to have the lyrics. It's fun.
Well, yeah, and I'm so glad you said that because I've had, again, many interviews with artists from all types of different things, not just music, but definitely filmmakers and dancers, and they all talk about doing things with intention, that you don't take it for granted, that it could be viewed to somebody else. Oh, you're doing this small gig over here. It's like, I view that gig just like I view the one in front of 100,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
I need to prepare that way mentally, physically, whatever else I need to do, and don't just take it for granted. And having the chance to talk to people who see this constantly kind of reminded me, hey, if you're going to do something, don't think, oh yeah, no problem, I got it. It's like, no, what are you going to do for your set list? What are you going to wear? What are you going to, did you promote it right? Who did you talk to? And just make sure that you're going to put out the best product as possible once you hit that stage.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I having been performing for over 50, 60 years, I guess. Actually, Gene and I started doing gigs when we were like 14, 15. So yeah, 60 years at least. And incrementally, every gig is important, right? Because you learn from it. Even when we were playing Hootenannies, there was just the two of us on guitar. I wanted to learn so much more, and I was so shy. So how could I get that information? The guys had the information, so I had to negotiate with myself. Number one, what would my opening line be? Which was always, "Hey, would you show me something, or would you get together with me?" And that led to, in the beginning, a lot of misunderstanding. I had to change my energy because guys just assumed I wanted to get together with them. What girl was going to ask a guy to show her how to play licks? No, that didn't happen. She has to want to sleep with me. So I had to learn how to negotiate that, just even in my tone. But I did it. I did it because I wanted to learn. And I realized, actually, the better the player, the less they're uptight. That was the reason why, Lowell and Skunk, and even like John and Paul, when I met them, I realized they loved meeting me because I didn't have to worry, was I going to come on to them or whatever. They knew I was experienced, and they knew that I knew what they went through, having to write songs and produce, just produce all the time and put on a certain, show, even just walking down the street or whatever. And I realize how important that is, to be on sort of that same status where you realize what the thing is. And the thing is made up of so many moving parts. That's number one. And a lot of people don't realize it, like what you said, the moving parts. Who are you going to talk to just around publicity? That's an important component. And you don't realize how important it is until you've done it 1,000 times.
Absolutely. I'm still a work in progress. I'm still learning these things as I go.
Yes, you are. And so am I. So are we all. But some people aren't as aware of it as others.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's just like I was talking about earlier. I never feel like I've hit a plateau. I never feel like I've hit a ceiling. It's like, if I ever feel like that, something's wrong.
If you're going to go up on stage, or even as a photographer, your work's going to get looked at and evaluated, you are up there without a net. Especially at live shows, there is no net. So if you make a mistake, number one, probably you shouldn't show that you made a mistake because no one notices. No one notices. You know, and if they do notice, who cares? There's always the next moment. You know, it just goes so fast that you have to stop caring about that. I beat myself up after gigs. Like, why did you hit that note? How could you have done that? It was so dumb. I mean, I'm beating up myself up for one or two mistakes I might have done, which only to me is a mistake. But that's how it is. You have to performance, and performing is its own art form. And you have to accept it for what it is, moment to moment.
Absolutely. I mean, anyone who's been watching my live streams, because I started doing these during the pandemic in 2020, I was so fortunate because a wonderful band, Alice from Los Angeles, was doing a virtual tour. They invited me to open up their shows and do interviews. I'm not tech oriented. And you can look back and see that I didn't know like where to look. I didn't know like what to have in the back. I didn't have any lights here, all this stuff. It was trying to learn these things and make sure that I kind of try to not be satisfied with what was getting presented because I thought it looked like crap. So it's like keep being aware of that fact. And like you were saying that I think every artist beats themselves up over mistakes that they think they made because 99% of the time the audience doesn't notice anything that you did. Right. And so it's just like the fake it till you make it. You just keep on going.
You know, and beyond that, it's also what's in the air. You know, in Spain, they have the name of I forget what the name of the goddess is, but if somebody goes on stage and they start playing and it's not there, they'll say she didn't come, so you know I just have to stop the show because she's not here. You know, it's in Fanny. We realized we'd do the same show one night, let's say on a Wednesday. And it would be just wild acclaim and people screaming encore after. On the next night, the same show, but at a different venue. It's a different night, and it just would fall flat. Like, what the hell happened, right? You just have to accept it for what it is. It is literally night to night, moment to moment, and just enjoy it for what it is because there's always the next gig. The next moment. That ought to be the name of my next album. The next moment.
Yeah, I'm thinking Sarah was my singer in my duo, and I love Sarah to death. But she would be always concerned about is anybody going to show up? And we're playing like coffee shop gigs. So I'm like, hey, we're going to get there. We're prepared. We're going to have fun. We're going to do what we want to do. We're playing live. We're getting a little bit of money. Yeah. And if there's two people there, we're going to give the same show as if there's 200 people there. But for her mentally, if she saw that there's maybe only a handful of people, it started to affect her. So we had to kind of figure out ways to get her in that positive mindset of like, hey, let's have fun with this. We're if you need to look off of me a little bit more, if we need to kind of have me do more lead vocals, and I can do that to help you feel a little bit better until more people show up, because invariably more people would eventually show up. Especially if it's people we knew that were like, hey, we want to support you. And my mom came to every show and that kind of thing.
That's perfect. It's just I've been watching documentaries on Norah Jones for the last couple of nights. Just accidentally, I run into stuff on YouTube, and it's so fascinating. I wasn't actually watching it about her, with her being interviewed, but her guitar player. And he was talking about how he just accidentally sat by her at a coffee shop or whatever at a bar, and they started to talk and they exchanged phone numbers. And she said, hey, maybe you come over and sit in with me at a gig. So he was playing with her when it hit. And he said literally 1 week they had a every week gig at a coffee shop, or probably not coffee shop, but some small bar or something like that. And literally 1 week there were 10 people, and the next week there were 100, and the next week sold out. You couldn't get tickets, and that's how fast it hit. So every show was actually as important as the one before, except maybe there weren't the same amount of people. Now, I don't think I'm quite sure that at first for her it was really exciting, because after they were opening for John Mayer within a few months. But I don't think it was really that exciting for her because it was so bewildering to have that kind of attention. So you got to be careful of how you handle all that attention and people's projections onto you. I find that, and I talk to the girls about this, I find that the hardest and the most dangerous aspect of being a successful or even a not successful performer is all the projections that are put on you. Like, are you going to believe people's thoughts? All of them? You can't. So you have to have your own assessment of yourself in order to survive. And that's where it gets so dangerous, really. And of course, a lot of management is male, so they put their projection on how you should look and act and, appear and all that kind of stuff, which can also be dangerous. So what I tell the girls is, hey, choices are us. I'm telling you about choices that you actually have, which you may not be prepared for, but you have those choices. You have that power. I realized when around the turn of the century or after, I was doing gigs with some female-fronted bands or bands that were starting out of here. And the ones who were getting record deals, they were terrorized by the thought, and it happened often, of a record company executive calling them, telling me, you got to go to a fat farm. I mean, they would just break down. It is so dangerous. So to have that kind of fallibility, I would say, get a grip on yourself, who you are. And if they don't like it, move on. What is it worth your life? Is it? I mean, I don't think so. That's where the confidence comes. You got to have confidence on who you are, actually, who you are as an artist, your songs, your sound.
Those are really, really powerful words, because look at how many artists out there that could be anywhere from 18 to 20 to 22, and they're still not quite sure. Anyone walking down the street, anyone watching this right now, whatever your career path is, you may not have figured it out yet. So you don't even know who you are as a person to be strong enough to be able to say, I'm not doing that. I'm not with that.
Well, I remember something that our manager, Fanny's manager, Roy Silver, said to us once. He said, stop asking people what they think of that show or this song. You may as well stand on a street corner and just ask people, well, what do you think? It's not that's not the way, so I always hold on to my center. I mean, even in band fights, what my opinion is. But you may as well just stand on a corner and ask people, everyone who passes by, well, what do you think? Why is it so important? When you put it that way, there's a huge sort of discrepancy in how you're valuing somebody's opinion. Your opinion is really the most important. And then you have a few, trusted confidants or whomever whom you can listen to, but that doesn't have to be the final word, like the Mix. Oh my God, the Mix. When the Doobie Brothers finally broke up, Skunk told me that every single band member had their own mix of the entire album. Are you nuts? So he counsels me on that. You can fight and not even talk backstage, and you can still do the shows. Imagine being that powerful. Every band member has their own mix. Do you know how much that costs?
That's incredible.
Incredible. I mean, the stories I've heard, it's like, this is not sort of what people talk about, but it's the truth. Who are you counting on? Who are you listening to? You cannot listen to everyone. You can't.
Yeah, and nowadays, we've got this other aspect called social media involved with people saying how much they love you, how much they hate you, and everyone's got a platform, whether they deserve one or not. And you can't listen to that noise. I mean, it doesn't matter.
Let's face it, it's white noise, and there's a lot of it. There's a lot of white noise. So.
Yep. Even for somebody like me, when I get comments that are very, very negative, I'm kind of like, where did this come from? And who the hell are you?
Who cares? It's very rarely that I'll, delete or unfriend someone, but I have done it a couple of times. People just feel so entitled. Come on. Did you do all the work? Especially, I noticed that since the documentary come out, I've gotten a lot less sneering comments, especially on the YouTube for the Fanny, the Fanny playlist or whatever. Like, what Fanny means and blah, blah, blah. Well, we didn't know when we changed our name to Fanny. We honestly did not know what it meant in England, okay? That being said, to be sneering about it 50 years later and making snide jokes, dude, I've heard it all before. You're not being in any way helpful or discerning or, giving worthwhile comments. You're just snaring. And I've encountered that since the beginning of the Svelts in high school. You know, in my first book, I describe how we were playing a teen center. And by the way, I remember when teen centers started because we had more gigs. This boy, we were up at a teen center. We were on stage that was, you know, on a rise. And he was trying to look up my skirt and he was sneering and laughing and he kept inviting guys over to try to look up my skirt. And I just kept moving to the side. They kept following, especially him. I finally just kicked him in the face with my pink high heels. And the end of the chapter is, do not mess with a woman in high heels or the girl in high heels with an electric guitar. You know, it's like I've had it with the snaring. It's been happening since 1965. I've had it, you know, but it's a lot less now. Now I'm getting comments like, wow, finally I'm hearing real music. How did you get that sound? I appreciate that so much.
I saw, I was saying there was an interview with, I want to say yourself and Gene talking about how people would come up to you to get an autograph like on an album. And maybe their vibe, their energy is just kind of that creepy ass kind of vibe, or, you know, they're looking at you physically, they don't, not really listening to your music.
Yeah.
And it became very much of like, you know, smiling and nodding and, you know, signing in, like, you know, basically get the fuck out of here.
Yeah, even worse is all the jams we did with guys who would come by Fanny Hill to see how good we were. And Gene and I had a thing where, you know, these guys are, you know, and they're not saying anything. They're just laying blues licks on top of everything and trying to play them as fast as they could. And Gene and I, at some point, would just look at each other and say, noodling, and we'd get them out of there as fast as we could. After all, it was our house. Why do we have to listen to that? You know, they weren't teaching us a thing. And yet they thought they were so great. You know, so, I mean, on that standpoint, I've literally seen it all. But when I get the respect from somebody, like I started to get in the 70s, really, like with, as I mentioned, the guys who were really good, like the Winters brothers were great. Jeff Beck was really great. You know, he didn't care that we were girls. He just enjoyed us for what it was, right? So, you know, you really got to discern between who's just kind of spouting hot air because they think they're so good and they're playing so fast and saying nothing. And I mean, we know when someone's saying something. We just know. I mean, listen to One Note by Jeff. He's saying something, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely. When I had brought my guitar into, when I worked with gang-involved youth in South Seattle, and one of my case managers wanted to hear me play because I was letting the students play. I mean, most of them never touched a guitar in their life. He said, yeah, come up here. And they're doing windmills and all this other kind of stuff, you know, everything they have in their head. And again, these are like predominantly African-American students that have been in trouble down in South Seattle. But they're 12, they're 13, they're being kids and having fun. But when I put the guitar on and I just played 2 notes from a B.B. King lick, my case manager's like, Mark, you're making it sing. You know, do more of that. I'm like, yeah, you know, sometimes you don't. Silence is good. You know, phrasing is good. Your intonation. You know, don't sit there and just try to impress people. Communicate. What is your artistry?
I mean, the first person impresses yourself, and that's hard to do. That is hard to do. So
yeah.
when I know that I'm stepping onto another level, you know, it's interesting. I had a conversation once with Amy of the Indigo Girls, right? And she asked me, what was your best moment on stage? And I thought for a few seconds. I said, you know, actually, I don't remember because the best moments are when I disappeared. And she just looked at me. She said, she just smiled. I don't even think she said anything because she knew what I was talking about. It's when you disappear that it's actually the best. So try to disappear more. See if you can get there.
Wow, that's awesome. That's it's almost like I do know what you're talking about. Well, it's like it's almost like you're not even there when you're playing. You're so.
You know, in the book I described playing at the Whiskey, and we had such a big sound, and we were also rehearsing at the Warner Brothers Sound Lot. So we would rehearse in these huge sound stages with huge ceilings and all. That's how, in a large part, we developed our sound, the bigger sound that was contained. And then we played the Whiskey many, many times. And we actually learned how to work with that sound and, you know, have incredible soundtracks and incredible gigs. But, you know, that is an art form of its own. You got to learn how to control the band sound, not just your sound. But in the book, I describe how, you know, we'd be in a really hot moment on stage at the Whiskey, and you'd be in the thing, in the circle really of your own circle, your own private circle. You could hear everything and you could feel yourself do licked, and you could feel yourself reaching for even more. And then everything disappeared. And then you'd come back and it'd be crash, bam, boom, just a lot of sound. So I'd be going in and out of that while doing one song. And that was pretty incredible, you know. That was when we really realized the power. I mean, we realized when we started the orb, going to the orb, everything else was white noise. I mean, the sneering, the disbelief, the whatever, you know, we just got over it. It's like, we're not even listening to that because what we're doing is so much more interesting. That's just chatter. That's just nonsense. So we realized quickly, I mean, I would say within 6 months to a year, not to listen to that stuff because we were in this magical orb. I mean, who cared? It was so much more interesting than they could ever imagine, you know. But then when we got into the sounds, barely 10 years later, not even 10 years later, you know, 6 years later, playing at the Whiskey. And that same year, when we were we rehearsed at the Warner Brothers Sound Lot late 70, and then when 71 was a huge year for us. I mean, we were backing Barbra Streisand live at Capitol Records on 2 songs. I mean, who does that? But we'd already played the Fillmore West. And so we're backing her. We go to the Fillmore East. We play the Tonight Show. You know, we played the first Sonny and Cher. I mean, it's just we're playing with Leon Russell, and he told me privately that we were his favorite band, you know. So I heard that, and I appreciate it because he was not kidding. So, you know, and then we got to Apple Records, and there we are recording with Jeff Emmerich and meeting the Beatles, you know. So it was it was a pretty pivotal year. We were learning so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, I'm just trying to wrap my head around all the experiences that you've had and what you just described.
But we were ready for it because we'd already worked so hard day after day, year after year since 64 when we were starting a band.
Sure. And that goes back to what you were saying earlier about, you know, putting in the time, doing the work, you know, and so that when things start to roll and they start to pay off for you, man, you'll be really super appreciative. Plus, like you said, which is so smart, you'll be able to block out that noise out here. Like, this is BS. This is BS stuff. This doesn't matter at all. This matters right here.
That's right. And you can't move forward without that mattering that much.
Yeah.
That much. You know, where you get all that accolade, but, you know, I would be practicing after the gig. I had a tape recorder and a small amp brought into my hotel room every day. So I practiced after gigs, even. You know, because they're clapped and the accolades and blah, 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 but you got the next day. And as girls, we could not mess up. We always had to be as good as we can be. That was our standard. We didn't say to each other, we got to be really good tomorrow night. But our sound checks were long. I mean, we did this tour with Chicago, and I couldn't believe it. They did not do sound checks. Their roadies did the line checks, right? And so finally I asked Peter Cetero, actually, I said, why don't you do sound checks? He said, well, because it doesn't matter. You know, the place fills up and the sound changes. And we found that it's just as good if we have our guys do the line checks and the microphones are exactly where they need to be. We just go on and we start playing. Those guys, they're whom they're paying to do it have done their sound check. And then they adjust when they're on stage. And I thought, oh my God, you know, to me, that took so much guts because as young women, we didn't feel like we could do that. We worked hard even at a sound check.
See,
and detail.
See, and you just explained something that, again, especially for female artists now, or even the last 20 years, about what you experienced and what you went through, that people are watching you and judging you differently because you're women.
That is right. Yeah, you cannot fail. we didn't say it, but my motto is we cannot fail. You know, and we took that seriously because we knew we had a responsibility. And we had to be the best that we could be every night. So that was pressure. I mean, that's probably partly why I got so tired.
Yeah, I mean, if you're constantly fighting, sneers and then that kind of false judgment and other things that the male bands didn't have to deal with that shit.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like, we're human. We can only take so much of this kind of stuff when we crack or need a break or need to do something, and unfortunately, as you're talking about this earlier in this interview, it's still going on now. That when let's say you're a person of color and you happen to be female and you step up on the stage, depending on what you are, some people are expecting certain things about you. They're already projecting onto you, this is what you're going to be like, and maybe you're nothing like that. You're some other type of music, and like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah.
It's like, that's not her issue. That's your issue. You're the one putting it onto them.
Right.
And I don't. Yeah, we could probably talk hours.
Yeah, we can. I don't even know how long we've been talking, but it's been enjoyable. I like talking about music, and what I'm invested in with IMA and through IMA. The rest of my life is booked, really, so I'm not in the least bit bored. I'm always learning and I'm always interested. And there's always more to learn as a Buddhist. I notice the next moment. Hey.
Well, and you just bring up something that I wanted to mention. In your background, did you ever spend, and I know with IMA, obviously you're teaching the workshops and everything else, but did you ever get to like a high school or collegiate level of actually teaching or guesting as a lecturer or something like that?
I do it all the time. I do.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Those are some of my best times, so I can go in. Sometimes it's with the film. They want me to answer a few questions, and it expands to, and I do a performance the next day or earlier that day or whatever, and I do a workshop. So that is really fun for me because it all comes together, everything I've learned that I can share, and it's valuable. It's valuable.
Yeah, because I saw something that was online that was like a TED Talk type of thing that you had done, and I kept thinking, especially after talking to you right now, I'm like, gosh, hopefully she's done more of this kind of thing because you have so much to give. You're so articulate, your vocabulary, just everything that's coming through, your energy. I'm like, God, I would listen to you for hours if you were there in front of me.
Yeah, and I wonder why people don't ask me more because, it's so valuable. I feel like I am like gold because of what I know, and how I can speak about it and how I've got these memories encoded in my body, and I can just call them up. I feel like I can do any interview anytime because I know. I don't worry about, am I going to be prepared for those questions? Like you said, you can turn your answer to answer any question that was asked or not asked. I know how to do that with you, of course. I'm not having to, deviate at all. I'm just interested. So blah, 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 blah. And sometimes I kind of wander around, but I am very interested. And that is the most important thing to me. If I'm ever not interested, it's over, right? What?
See, that's something we share. I tell people all the time that I'm endlessly curious about people and also about the journey that they're taking and the one that they're on. And particularly with artistic folks, I'm just like a sponge. I'm just taking it all in and seeing comparisons, things that maybe I didn't think about. And I love that. Just the fact that from that aspect alone, it's like, I'm going to be having takeaways from this interview, so many of them that I'm going to be talking.
One thing I really appreciate now is people notice or they know that I'm Filipino American, and that means a lot to them. So, when I'm asked to do something that has to do with being Asian American or a Filipino American woman, etc., I find that hugely gratifying. Like on this, the Fanny tour, the mini tour we did in May to back the coming out of Fanny, the Right to Rock on PBS. Bree and I opened it up without the rest of the band because it was sponsored by an Asian American family, and it was not in San Diego, outside of San Diego. I'm forgetting the city now, but and wow, there were so many Asian American families there, and they were just me and Bree, and we just did, like we did some stuff from Fanny Walk the Earth, and we also did Be My Baby, and we got to talk about, the stuff that we learned from. What was the progression? What was the progress that we made? The types of songs that we, do You Believe in Magic? That's an incredible song. And it's incredible to learn. And by the way, at the camps, I feel like it's my particular job to bring the beat into the girls' orbit, because a lot of them are writing songs or playing songs in the room, and it doesn't really have a beat. So, Magic Carpet Ride, baby, that's only 3 chords. 3 or 4. And we actually did that at a preteen camp. But, so I'm just as thrilled to be in front of Asian Americans and to be asked about, wow, how did I not know about you before? This is incredible. I'm so happy. That makes me incredibly happy, so I find that energy to be building. So I just love it.
Well, I'm glad to hear that because, again, as I mentioned earlier, I saw the press release for the documentary that's going to be on PBS. Yeah, back in May, API Heritage Month. And me being Japanese American, and I used to work at several nonprofits in Seattle, so I was real community oriented. I still am.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, oh, and I have full transparency. I was in the middle of a film festival at the time, so I'm like, I don't have time to look at anything else. But then I saw that press release. I'm like, it's about a band, it's about a documentary, which is 2 things I love. So I'm like, let me look at the trailer.
And then
and then I was hooked. I was like, all right. I told the publicist, send the link over to me. And then I watched it. And I actually remember I watched it as soon as that link came in. I said, are these folks available for interviews? I want to talk to anybody that has time.
Right.
And I got to talk to Bobby back then, right before she went to met you guys in California to do those shows.
Yeah.
And then I got in touch with you. And it's just like, hey, you're doing all the camps. So like, let's get together like end of August or September. And here we are.
Yeah, I had 0 time then, but I appreciated your getting in touch with me.
Yeah, no, it's been, I think it's interesting to me too, because I grew up in a suburb called Kirkland, which is like near Bellevue where Microsoft and all that kind of thing is. I was born in Seattle, but raised out there. So my cultural identity was really shifted. I had nothing but Caucasians around me for the most part, other than one Japanese friend that I had in elementary school. And so it wasn't until I started working professionally in Seattle, being around other cultures, other ethnicities, other religions. And so it's interesting when people, especially from these interviews, they want to talk to me about either I'm not Japanese or Asian enough, or I'm the other way around. It's kind of like, well, like we were talking about, I'm going to be me. I'm going to put out what I think is authentically myself. And if you're with it, cool. And if you're not, that's fine, because
I don't even know why that's a topic that needs to be brought up, but I hear you saying that that's important to other people. It seems silly to me. Am I Filipina enough? What is that? Right?
Yeah, exactly. I know. I'll see those, and knock on wood, it's been like maybe a couple of years since I've been seeing those kind of comments. But I'm kind of like, is that where your head's at?
Right. Yeah.
I don't
well
know.
Balanced. To me, that's the key to everything. Work hard, play hard, enjoy hard. Notice.
Absolutely. Take things in. Don't take those wonderful things for granted that are around you, that you're experiencing.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really great area to stop and the conversation in June. Again, thank you so much for taking the time. This has been amazing talking with you. And if you ever have anything else, sounds like you're working on your 2nd book, so maybe we'll have a chance to come back together when that's getting out, and we'll help promote it. If you got something else, I love having guests come back. I say that all the time. I truthfully mean that. And I'll make sure that I add some links to my description so that everything people that are watching this can access the things that we were talking about. And again, check out the documentary if you're like wondering. This and the DVD has some bonus features, which I love. That's why one of the reasons why I got it. So, but again, June, thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.